Okay, it's been a whole week. I've already 100% the game with 26 hours of playtime, and I just gotta talk about Resident Evil 9. It's coming up nearly a decade since I've been a fan of the Resident Evil franchise, ever since the Resident Evil 7 demo, and not gonna lie, for the past decade, Capcom has been cooking, and we've been well fed. Ever since the birth of the RE engine, Capcom has consistently delivered a high-quality survival horror for its photorealistic visuals, as well as dabbling into the action sector. And after concluding a character's story on one hand and a series of remakes on the other, Capcom revealed a new installment with a new protagonist, and then later on revealing a familiar legend. So I guess we're going to bingo. If you want a spoiler-free general thoughts and feelings, you can skip to here or the chapter. Resident Evil Requiem bounces between FBI analyst Grace Ashcroft and DSO badass Leon S. Kennedy, with the overall premise following the main characters as they investigate mysterious deaths surrounding a virus. They end up getting pulled into danger whilst also uncovering secrets about Umbrella and a mysterious virus named Elpis, alongside a looming menacing figure who needs a lot of CeraVe. But the core story is primarily about confronting your past, as with Grace, it's more of an emotional one, as she has to unravel the mystery behind her mother's death. Whereas Leon's more or less physical confrontation, as he's got to deal with a really bad cold whilst going back to Raccoon City for probably the most depressing work reunion of all time. But the game itself has twists and turns that interferes with the key lore regarding Umbrella, Oswald Spencer, my sexual orientation as Leon pries open a door. But later on in the game, it's eventually revealed that Spencer is essentially Grace's father, and that Alyssa Ashcroft adopted her, with the game throughout implying that she is the key to the mysterious virus named Elpis, and also implying that she might have some powers of some sorts. But then the game kind of flips the switch with a surprisingly sincere moment that reveals that Spencer regretted what he made and created Elpis as a cure that ends up helping Leon with his cold to power through the boss fight, whilst also revealing that Grace doesn't have any special powers at all, which is actually kind of a refreshing way to approach the character. And then the game ends on a very nice and open note that I can only assume would lead into Resident Evil 10. But the overall structure of the narrative is reminiscent of Devil May Cry 5, as you keep bouncing between the main characters in different amount of times, as their gameplay within the story overlaps but aligned with the Resident Evil cliche. The main protagonist for the first half is Grace. You do occasionally play as Leon, but his gameplay moments are short-lived, as the first half of the game is primarily a survival horror. I found Grace's gameplay to probably be the most engaging. Like, the hospital level is clearly classic Resident Evil coded, but also she's very disempowered, with her objective is just to solve puzzles than anything. Yes, you can equip weapons, knives, or injectors that make zombies go pop. Goes my heart. But you never really feel safe, as the zombies are pretty much bullet sponges with the chance of mutation. Unless if you pull out the Requiem. Then, but it's elements from the RE2 remake that goes hand in hand with the combat of RE7 that results in a definitive horror experience with Grace. I also think the characterization of Grace, a person who is already traumatized and anxious, being put in a horrific situation, helps us not only to empathize with her, but also justifies why her gameplay would be clunky, in the sense of movements are staggered and aiming would be very shaky, as well as her dialogues are mostly stuttery and kind of state the obviously.
Hey, are you with me?
Oh, there might be answers inside.
Yeah, sure, right.
She's so, like, socially inept. Finally, a character I can relate to. But also, her character is just a nice person, notably her relationship with Emily, a blind girl that you encounter in the cell, and how Grace goes out of her way to save her, but then when Emily gets hurt and eventually mutates, as horrific as that situation is, Grace is still trying to save Emily, even if she's mutated, getting upset when Leon had to put the mutated Emily down, which is probably the most emotional and darkest moment throughout the whole game. Although there are segments as him in the first half, it's the second half of the game where you take the stage as Leon. When he re-enters Raccoon City, the game kind of changes the environment where it kind of feels like you're playing The Last of Us. Leon's gameplay is just RE4 remake if it was cranked the fuck up to 11. Like, the gunplay feels great and you got an axe that you can infinitely sharpen, so infinite parry, my dude. It's purely action-packed with enough horror to give you a challenge, and the game makes that very clear when the first boss you encounter is a big-ass fucking spider. I'm not arachnophobic, but I don't think spiders should be getting married, let alone having kids. I'm getting PTSD from Alien Romulus, but I think the spider boss fight might be a nod or a homage to Devil May Cry, as Devil May Cry was originally supposed to be an RE4 game. But I can comfortably say this is probably the coolest that Leon has been, especially when you throw in the suit outfit, cause then I'm just playing John Wick before the John Wick game is even out. But I also respect that despite the combat heavy gameplay, there is a restraint to it to allow horror to comfortably exist, as Leon isn't entirely overpowered, as he is thrown into situations involving amplified enemies with either guns, spears, explosive, or just zombies that look like Iggy Pop, as well as putting Leon in an environment to make players consider their gameplay rather than run and gun. Also, honorable mention for the motorcycle sequence. I did not expect that. I thought it was a pretty neat reference to the animated film Resident Evil Vendetta. What? But playing as Leon and just going through the combat, just having fun with it, makes this already definitive survival horror gameplay have an equally definitive action gameplay. His character this time is a little more edgy, but he still cracks corny jokes, even if he's basically near death.
We can begin your treatment. A silent treatment, I hope.
But I also think the little moments between him and Grace later on are kind of sweet. Especially when he says he feels like $1 million despite coughing up blood and throwing up the stunt guy thumbs up, like he's Ryan Gosling. But I think the most wholesome moment is when the base is crumbling down after the boss fight. With no way out, he chooses to sit next to Grace, not leaving her side, which reminded me of the ending in Speed, which is a very wholesome moment. Wait, Leon's married? Well, there goes that dream. Hey Grace, wanna grab a beer? Although the game does have its positive, it's not without flaws, particularly in its narrative and overall game design. The latter act does follow the mentioned cliched exposition in a lab setting, then a boss battle with spots to shoot, and then ends on a happy ending for most characters. Like the character of Emily still being alive and then cured kind of felt like a cop-out move on the writing, because I do think the moment where Leon has to shoot the mutated Emily is not only dark, but it's also very emotional and adds more thematic element on this is who Umbrella or anyone creating viruses and shit is hurting. As an audience or player, it gives me reason to fuck up the bad guys even more. And although the happy ending could and does work, but it's delivered in such way that it felt like a giant PS at the end of a letter, as the core story wasn't really about curing Emily, because after that moment where Leon shoots the mutated Emily, we all assumed she was dead. The game also throws a multiple choice ending at you that doesn't really matter. It kind of reminded me of RE7, where you're given the choice between Mia and Zoe, but in this case one choice leads to a boss fight with the canon ending, and the other just ends the game on a very depressing and stale note, because you and the game knows that the ending where Leon dies is most certainly a bad one. The game design is just kind of a shell of its former self. Like the free quartz puzzle to exit the hospital is just a reskin of the free coin puzzle in RE2 to get out of RPD. The whole basement view segment is just kind of another sewer level, or the Raccoon City segment is just putting together a bomb with parts scattered around. The game design of Resident Evil is just kind of repetitive, as you're mainly just backtracking, sometimes in circles, to put a thing in a thing to open an area, to exit the level, to then do another thing again whilst progressing through the story. But where others are kind of subtle or different, Requiem is not really that. Requiem reminds you that you're playing a Resident Evil game, and it doesn't feel like it's reinventing the wheel or doing anything new in terms of game design or story-wise. But it sort of leans into the hallmark and cliches that made these games so iconic in the first place. But in doing that, it results in a game that feels more like a legacy sequel that's paying homage rather than a fresh new installment or sequel. Keep in mind I only labeled it as a flaw because I don't really know how to feel about it, as it doesn't really impact the game negatively, but it does make this overall experience feel a tad hollow, even if I do believe this comes close to being the most definitive Resident Evil game since RE4 Remake. But I will say this, the lack of Ada Wong is kinda disturbing. Resident Evil Requiem, for better or for worse, is the sum of the franchise's iconic hallmarks, but it certainly delivers an engaging balance between horror frights and total action bliss. 4 grace out of 5. I'll even give it a certified banger stamp of approval. I do definitely believe this game is definitely Game of the Year material. It doesn't come close to RE4 or its remake in my opinion, but it's still a great game that offers an interesting story and a fun gameplay that makes this worthwhile. I'd say it's on par with Resident Evil Village or Resident Evil 7, as they're pretty fun games to speedrun through. And on top of that, I 100% the game, which honestly is not really saying much, as it's probably one of the easiest Resident Evil to 100%. I think Capcom definitely found their stride with making bangers, and I look forward to the next one. I hope Grace gets the Leon treatment because she is a very interesting character, and I look forward to seeing her overall arc in the franchise and hopefully see her doing some cool shit. Anyway, on that note, thanks for hearing me out. I've been me, you've been you. I hope this made for a decent background noise, but let me know what you thought of Resident Evil Requiem. Did you think Leon should have been shirtless? Did you think Grace should have went, damn, that DSO guy is sure cute. Hope he likes bingo. On that note, have a good night. What the fuck?